Hello, and welcome to my presentation on Ivan Pavlov. My name is Marc Scillia, and I'm going to talk today about some facts on this Russian physiologist. And he was a physiologist, not a psychologist, as some may have thought. And the difference between the two, a physiologist studies the various biochemical and mechanical functions and structures and systems of an organism, whereas a psychologist studies the cognition, motivation, emotion, perception, and behavior of an individual. Ivan Pavlov was born in 1849 and he died in 1936, so he lived a pretty long life. And he had some great accomplishments, including winning a Nobel Prize in Physiology and Medicine in 1904. He had two really great quotes that I like. One is, "While you are experimenting, do not remain content with the surface of things." And I like that because in science, you really have to go way beneath the surface to get to the root of things and really understand what's going on. The other quote I like is, "Don't become a mere recorder of facts, but try to penetrate the mystery of their origin." I thought that was a really great quote as well. So Pavlov was famous for his experiments with dogs, and he did psychology experiments, whereas the dogs would salivate whenever they would see food. So he realized that dogs don't learn this, that they're actually hardwired into the dog. In behaviorist terms, it's an unconditional response. For example, a stimulus-response connection that required no learning at all. So classical conditioning, an important term, is a neutral response, a neutral stimulus elicits a response that was originally produced by another stimulus. So a good example of this comes from Fitzgerald and Brackbill, and this reference is in the sense that infants and toddlers are capable of classical conditioning when stimuli are associated with feeding or some other pleasant event. Some examples include a dog salivating when a bell is sounded, infants sucking when they hear a tone. The other kind of conditioning is called operant conditioning, and this focuses on the relation between the consequences of behavior and the likelihood that behavior will recur. So, for example, positive actions yield positive behaviors, and conversely, negative actions yield negative behaviors. So, with the positive action, something's likely to be repeated. And with the negative side of it, it's not likely to be repeated. So that's operant conditioning. The other important term we want to discuss is imitation. And imitation is learned through watching the actions and behaviors of others. So a good reference for this was Barr and Hain did a study on older children, adolescents, and young adults, whereas they simply learn just by watching others behave. So, for example, an athlete, a student athlete, a young athlete can learn to become a better athlete simply by watching athletes on TV. So, by observation, you get better at what it is you want to do. Meltzoff and Moore, a great reference here, is that even infants and newborns can imitate. For example, sticking out their tongue. So if mom or dad is holding the baby and they stick their tongue out, the baby has shown, or infants have shown, that they will imitate this. However, some scientists believe that this is not so much imitation as it is something that is not yet learned from the newborn. So there's a little controversy with that, but nonetheless, if the mother sticks the tongue out and the baby sticks the tongue out, it looks like imitation from where I'm sitting. So memory, a good reference for memory, Roe v. Collier's experiments they showed 3 important features of memory exist as early as 2 and 3 months of age. The first one is an event from the past is remembered. The second, excuse me, over time, the event can no longer be recalled. And 3, a cue can serve to dredge up a memory that seems to have been forgotten. When we talk about memory, we talk of 2 parts of the brain. The hippocampus, which is the storage part or component for memory, and the frontal cortex, which is the retrieval part of memory. These areas in the brain are responsible for memory, and the hippocampus is not actually mature until almost 2 years of age. So as a child is developing from 0 to 2 years old, these parts of the brain are developing as well. So memories obviously cannot be stored or retrieved until these areas are developed fully. However, this is the beginning stages of when it happens for all of us as humans. And then, of course, as they get older, these memories build and can be recalled easier. There's another type of, or a specific type of memory called autobiographical memory. And this refers to people's memory of a significant event and experiences of their own lives. So, for example, someone may ask you, what was your 4th grade teacher's name? And that's something that you can relate to because it was your teacher that you had in 4th grade. So you can probably recall that. Well, some people can. I actually can't. However, some things like facts, if someone says, what's the capital of Canada? This is something that is not an autobiographical memory because it's not something that you relate to in your own life. More so, it's something that you memorized because you were told it or you learned it from somewhere. So I'd like to show a short video, and it shows Ivan Pavlov in the early years, back I guess probably around the turn of the century sometime. And the narrator kind of describes and discusses some of the types of conditioning and actually shows some examples here. So let's take a look.
Ironically, one of the most important figures in the study of learning, Ivan Pavlov, wasn't concerned with the subject at all, at least not at first. Pavlov, a noted Russian scientist, won the Nobel Prize for Physiology and Medicine in 1904. As this original footage shows, Pavlov was initially interested in digestion and the action of the salivary glands. By diverting the saliva of dogs into test tubes, he could precisely measure if and how much they salivated during digestion. When food was presented, the dog salivated quickly, an inherited salivary reflex. But over repeated testings, a strange thing happened. The dog salivated before contact with the food. Just the sight of the food was enough to stimulate their drooling. Then, just seeing the food dish, or even hearing the footsteps of Pavlov or his assistants, was enough to trigger this built-in reflex. What was going on to elicit this response? Pavlov decided to find out by systematically varying the stimuli and measuring the dog's reaction.
I actually wanted to pause it there for a moment because I had a comment. I actually read that Pavlov was actually, he kind of stumbled upon this because he didn't really realize until after the dog was salivating and there was no food present. So it was a conditioned response. And this is what he based his life's work on, is when he realized this. And he also said and mentioned that it was quite annoying because the dogs would associate either him or his assistant walking in the room with actually eating. So he said he was very frustrated by this, and I can imagine how that can be annoying. But he dedicated his life work to this beginning part of classical conditioning. Let's continue.
Metronomes, lights, and bells were all used as stimuli, and they all worked as stand-ins for the food. What mattered was not the kind of stimulus that was used, but the fact that it reliably signaled that food was on the way. Pavlov had discovered a fundamental type of learning called classical conditioning. An original stimulus elicits an automatic, unlearned response. Both stimulus and response happen naturally. They are unconditioned. Then a second, neutral stimulus that never elicits the unconditioned response by itself is introduced just before the presentation of the original stimulus. If the neutral or signaling stimulus is presented alone, and response occurs as if the original stimulus were still there, we say that conditioning has taken place. Arbitrary neutral stimulus becomes a conditioned stimulus. The reverse is also true. Pavlov and others studied the extinction over time of such conditioned responses. When the subject learns that the conditioned stimulus no longer signals a desired event, the acquisition process is reversed, as the learned connection is gradually weakened. Pavlov's work, and the work of those who followed him, led to a remarkable conclusion, and that is, any stimulus an organism can perceive is capable of eliciting any reaction the organism is capable of making. This means that virtually any sound, sight, or smell can influence the way our muscles tense or relax, our moods fluctuate, or even the way our attitudes are formed. For instance, if I say, relax, and then do this, you're going to be startled and upset. After 5 to 6 pairings of relax, just saying the word relax is going to generate a negative response rather than its usual learned reaction.
All right, so that's my little presentation there. So these studies in the dogs came to be known as Pavlovian dogs, and this terminology is obviously present today, and you may even hear it if you're socializing with a psychologist or two. So I hope you enjoyed my presentation on Ivan Pavlov, great Russian physiologist, and have a great evening. Thanks.